My name is Rebecca Carter, and for most of my life, I believed I understood quiet routines. I believed I understood marriage. I believed I understood people. But nothing prepared me for the day I learned why my husband kept visiting our neighbor's house every single day, with the same gentle knock on her door and the same soft smile she gave him back. And nothing prepared me for what that smile really meant. I still remember the first moment that made my heart pause. It was a warm Tuesday morning, the kind where the sun fills the kitchen before your eyes are even ready for the day. I was making coffee, standing barefoot on the cool tiles, when I looked out the window and saw my husband, Joseph, crossing the lawn again. Same path, same steps, same time, straight toward our neighbor's house. Her name was Margaret Hill, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun. She moved into the small blue house next door only 6 months ago. Quiet, polite, never caused trouble. But every day, she smiled when she saw my husband coming. And every day, he smiled back. It wasn't a loud smile, not flirtatious, not strange, just soft, gentle, almost familiar. And for a moment, I felt something inside me sink, like a small stone falling into deep, still water. That morning, I pressed my hand against the window pane and whispered to myself, why does he go there so much? Joseph wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed long conversations or neighborhood gossip. He liked his tools, his morning walks, his quiet life. So this routine didn't fit him at all. I watched as he reached her porch, knocked twice just like always, and stepped inside as she opened the door with that same warm smile. No hesitation, no questions, just walked in. My coffee sat untouched on the counter. The house felt suddenly too big, too quiet, too filled with questions I didn't want to admit I had. But I didn't tell him what I saw, not that day. Because sometimes when something feels wrong, you tell yourself to wait, to breathe, to not assume, to not break the peace you've spent years building. Still, a small thought whispered inside me. Why does she smile like that? Why does he go every day? And why am I only noticing now? For the rest of the morning, every sound, the faucet dripping, the fridge humming, the clock ticking, felt louder than usual, as if the whole house was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I didn't know it then, but that day was the beginning. The beginning of uncovering a truth that would change everything: our marriage, our home, and the way I understood love itself. And it all started with a smile. A simple smile from the neighbor next door. For the next few days after that morning, I tried to act normal. I cooked breakfast like always. I watered the plants. I folded laundry in the living room while the afternoon sun warmed the carpet. I even laughed at a joke Joseph made, though my smile felt thin, as if it were made of paper. But inside, a quiet worry kept moving around, like a small draft under a closed door. Joseph and I had been married for 22 years. We lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Madison, Wisconsin. The kind of place where kids rode bikes in slow circles and neighbors borrowed sugar without knocking twice. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, predictable, safe. At least, that's what I believed. Joseph was the dependable type. Not overly affectionate, not the one to plan surprises, but steady in the way a person who grew up with little often learns to be. He worked at a small hardware store, helped fix things for folks in town, and rarely complained. His world was simple, and I thought I was part of that simplicity. And maybe that's what bothered me the most. His visits next door weren't simple. They didn't belong to our ordinary. I first met Margaret Hill a few weeks after she moved in. She stood on her porch arranging potted flowers, bright red geraniums, the kind my mother used to love. I walked over with a plate of chocolate chip cookies, trying to be welcoming. She thanked me with a gentle smile, the same one she now gave my husband every day. Back then, I thought she seemed kind, a little lonely maybe. Her eyes carried a softness that felt familiar, like someone who had lost more than she wanted to talk about. We spoke about the weather, about how peaceful the neighborhood was, about the bakery she missed from her old town. Nothing personal, nothing deep, but she had warmth in her voice, the kind people don't fake. So when Joseph first offered to help her with small things, fixing a loose step, checking her gutters, carrying heavy boxes, I didn't think twice. Helping was part of who he was. He had helped our previous neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, until the man moved to a nursing home. It was normal. But daily visits weren't normal. Not for Joseph, not for us. That week, I tried to push the thought aside. I swept the front porch. I organized the pantry. I made chicken soup the way Joseph liked it, with extra thyme and thin noodles. That evening he came home later than usual. When he walked through the door, his hair was windblown and his shirt dusty, as if he had been moving boxes or crawling into tight spaces. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Yeah," he said, dropping his keys into the bowl on the counter. "Just helping Margaret with a few things." He said her name so casually, so simply, as if it were nothing more than a friendly favor. I nodded, stirring the soup slowly. "You're spending a lot of time there. Everything okay?" He hesitated for the smallest second. A flicker, a pause that lasted no longer than a breath. Then he smiled soft, tired. "Yeah, she just needs help with things around the house. She's older, living alone." His answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete. Something inside me shifted. Not suspicion exactly, more like a quiet ache of confusion. That night, after we washed the dishes together, I stood at the bathroom mirror brushing my hair. I watched him through the reflection as he sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his shoulders. "We should invite her over for dinner someday," I said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Margaret?" "Yes, she's new. It might make her feel welcome." He nodded again, but his answer came a little too fast. "Maybe. She's kind of private though." I didn't press. I didn't want to sound like I was digging, but his reaction settled inside me like a pebble at the bottom of a pond, small, but impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dim, the sky still holding the last bit of night. I went to the window without thinking, as if pulled by something I didn't understand. And there he was, walking next door again. Same path, same steps, but this time, even earlier. I watched as Margaret opened the door. She greeted him with that gentle smile, the same one that made my stomach twist. They spoke for only a second before he stepped inside. The door closed, and the house felt too quiet again. Maybe it was innocent, maybe it wasn't, but my heart whispered something I hadn't dared admit. Something is happening next door, and I don't know what it is. That day, I decided I had to stop pretending nothing was wrong. I had to understand, not jump to conclusions, not accuse, just understand. Because sometimes the things we ignore grow bigger in the dark. And I could feel something growing. I just didn't know yet how much it would change my life. The next few days moved slowly, like pages turning in a book I wasn't sure I wanted to read. Every morning, I found myself listening without meaning to, listening for Joseph's footsteps, the soft click of the front door, the quiet sound of him crossing the yard. I hated that I was doing it, but I couldn't stop. On Thursday, I walked outside to check the mail, pretending not to look in the direction of Margaret's house. The air was cool, the kind that usually wakes you up gently, but my chest felt heavy. Across the lawn, I saw Joseph carrying a cardboard box out of Margaret's garage. She stood beside him, holding the door open, her eyes following his movements with that same calm expression. Not suspicious, not secretive, just soft, familiar. He didn't see me watching. Maybe that made it worse. When he came home later, I asked, "What were you carrying today?" He looked surprised. "Oh, just some old things she wanted to move out of the garage. Nothing important." Again, his answer wasn't wrong, but something in the way he spoke made me feel like he was choosing his words carefully. I tried to ignore the feeling. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself people help neighbors all the time. But the truth is, when you love someone, you know when something changes in them, even if it's small, even if they try to hide it. That night, while we sat on the couch watching a movie, I noticed he kept checking the time. Not obviously, just small glances, soft glances. The kind you only spot when you've memorized someone's movements through years of living beside them. Around 9:30, he stood up. "I'm going to step out for a minute," he said. "Now?" I asked. "Yeah, Margaret needs help with her back door. It won't close properly." The words pricked something inside me. "At this hour?" He paused, just long enough for me to feel it. "Yeah, she said she can't sleep unless it's fixed." "I won't be long." He grabbed his coat and left before I could answer. I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen, the silence pressing in from all sides. My hands moved together, fingers curling and uncurling in my lap, like they were searching for something solid to hold on to. Minutes passed, then more minutes. I tried to breathe slowly, telling myself not to imagine things that weren't true, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Around 10, I walked to the bedroom window and looked out. The lights in Margaret's house were still on. I could see the faint glow behind her curtains. A shadow moved once, maybe twice. I couldn't tell whose it was. My heart felt tight in my chest. When Joseph came home a few minutes later, I heard the quiet click of the door, the firm exhale he always let out when he was tired. I stayed still, pretending to read a magazine. It was a loose hinge, he said, hanging up his coat. Didn't take long. I nodded, but the ache stayed. I wanted to ask why he went so late. I could see the faint glow behind her curtains. A shadow moved once, maybe twice. I couldn't tell whose it was. My heart felt tight in my chest. When Joseph came home a few minutes later, I heard the quiet click of the door, the firm exhale he always let out when he was tired. I stayed still, pretending to read a magazine. It was a loose hinge, he said, hanging up his coat. Didn't take long. I nodded, but the ache stayed. I wanted to ask why he went so late. I wanted to ask why she needed him specifically. I wanted to ask why she smiled the way she did. But something held me back. A fear maybe, a hesitation, a feeling that once I asked the question, everything would change. For the next 2 days, I watched more closely, not in a jealous way, more like someone trying to understand a puzzle with missing pieces. On Saturday morning, I saw something new. Joseph wasn't alone. He and Margaret were sitting on her front porch talking, just talking, not doing repairs, not carrying boxes, just talking. Their voices were too low to hear, but I could see the ease in their posture, the comfort, and it made my heart twist in a way I didn't expect. Later, when he came home, I asked gently, "Did she need help again?" He hesitated. "No, we were just talking." I waited, hoping he would continue, hoping he would offer something more, a reason, an explanation, but he didn't. So I asked the smallest question that sat heavy on my tongue. "What do you talk about?" He looked down at his hands. "Just things she's going through." "What kinds of things?" He shrugged lightly. "Stuff about her past. Some family things. I don't want to share her private life." His answer was kind, respectful, the kind of answer a good man would give, but it didn't ease my heart, because he wasn't talking to me about those things. He was talking to her. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the soft hum of the heater filled the room. I listened to Joseph breathing beside me, steady and familiar. I should have found comfort in it, but I didn't. Instead, I felt distance, quiet, invisible, but real, a space I didn't know how to cross. I whispered into the dark, "Why her, Joseph? Why every day?" But there was no answer, only silence. And that silence felt like the beginning of something I didn't want to face. The next morning, I made a decision, a small one, a gentle one, but a decision that changed everything that came after. I would go next door, not to confront, not to accuse, just to see for myself. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come to you. Sometimes you have to walk toward it, even when your heart is afraid. The next morning, sunlight was spilling across the kitchen floor when I finally gathered enough courage to walk next door. My hands felt cold, even though the day was warm. I moved slowly across the lawn, trying to steady my breath. I told myself I wasn't going there to accuse anyone. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. Mostly, I was tired of not knowing. When I reached Margaret's porch, I paused for a second, listening to the quiet. I could smell the faint scent of lavender from the small plant pot beside her door, the same plant she tended to every evening. I raised my hand and knocked gently. A moment later, the door opened. Margaret stood there wearing a soft gray sweater and her usual calm smile. "Rebecca," she said kindly. "Good morning." "Hi," I replied, forcing a smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she said, stepping aside. "Please, come in." I hesitated, not because of her. She seemed warm, as always, but because I didn't know what I would find inside. Still, I stepped in. Her living room was tidy and quiet, the sunlight falling softly on the wooden floors. A faint smell of tea lingered in the air. Family photos were arranged neatly on a shelf, pictures of children, grandchildren, moments frozen in time. She motioned to the couch. "Would you like some tea?" I nodded, though my throat felt tight. She walked to the kitchen, and I sat down, my hands clasped together. While she poured the tea, I looked around the room. Everything felt normal, peaceful, but that didn't ease the weight inside my chest. When she returned and handed me a warm cup, she sat in the chair across from me. "What brings you over today?" she asked gently. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I just wanted to check on you, and to thank you for being kind to Joseph. Her eyes softened, but she didn't say anything right away. She took a slow sip of her tea, as if she was choosing her words carefully. He's a good man, she said finally. You're lucky to have someone like him. I nodded. He helps people. That's who he is. It is, she agreed quietly. There was a pause long enough for me to feel it, long enough for me to wonder if she knew what I wasn't saying. So I asked gently, he comes here, often? She didn't look surprised. If anything, she seemed prepared for that question. Yes, she said softly. He does. Is everything all right? I whispered. She took a slow breath, her gaze dropping to her hands. When she looked back up, there was something in her eyes, something sad, something heavy. Rebecca, she said gently, I want to tell you something, but I wasn't sure how to say it. My heart tightened. What is it? She looked toward the window where sunlight touched her curtains. Your husband reminds me of someone I lost. I blinked, caught off guard. Someone you lost? She nodded slowly. My son. A quiet stillness filled the room. I frowned, trying to understand. Your son? Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. His name was Joseph. He died 4 years ago. He was around your husband's age. Same calm voice, same way of helping without expecting anything back. I felt my breath catch. He died in a car accident, she continued. I never really recovered from it. The room seemed to shift, the air growing heavier. Joseph reminds you of him? I asked softly. She nodded again. He doesn't know that. I never told him. I didn't want to put that weight on him. I felt something inside my chest loosen and tighten at the same time. She continued. When he comes by, it feels like I'm seeing a piece of my son again. Just a piece. Something familiar to hold on to. Her voice broke slightly. But I understand how this must look from your side, she said, lifting her eyes to mine. I'm so sorry if it caused you any worry. I opened my mouth, but no words came out at first. My heart was full sadness, relief, guilt, confusion, all mixed together. I didn't know, I finally whispered. She smiled faintly. I didn't expect you to. For a moment, the two of us sat in silence, two women carrying different kinds of grief. Mine quiet and growing, hers old and aching. Then she added softly, Joseph has been helping me sort through Joseph's old things. I told him I was ready to let some of them go, but truthfully, I just needed someone patient beside me, someone who reminded me of him. Her words settled into me, slow and heavy. But he never hid anything from you, she said gently. He's only trying to help. I nodded, but something else lingered inside me, something she hadn't said yet. A shadow, a pause, a feeling that her story wasn't finished. When I stood to leave a few minutes later, she touched my hand lightly. There's one more thing I need to tell you, she whispered. My heart froze for a moment. But I'd like to say it when Joseph is here too. I swallowed. Why? She looked at me with eyes that held both warmth and worry. Because it concerns both of you. My breath felt thin. And in that quiet moment on her porch, with sunlight brushing against the wooden railing, I realized something. The truth wasn't simple. And whatever it was waiting for us. I walked back home feeling like my feet were touching the ground, but the rest of me wasn't. My thoughts were spinning, gentle but heavy, like clouds before a storm. What Margaret told me had softened something inside me, yet at the same time, it opened a door to something I didn't understand. Why did she need both of us present for the rest of the truth? Why did her voice tremble when she said it? And why did I suddenly feel scared? When I reached the kitchen, I sat at the table and stared at the cup of tea I had left there earlier. Steam no longer rose from it. The house felt quiet to quiet, like it was waiting for something. A few hours later, Joseph came home. I could tell from the moment he stepped in that he sensed something different in the air. He paused near the counter, studying my face the way he did when he wasn't sure what mood I was in. Everything all right? He asked. I nodded slowly. I went to see Margaret today. His eyebrows lifted, but not in alarm. More like surprise. You did? Yes, I said, folding my hands together. We talked for a while. He put his things down and sat across from me. What did she say? I held his gaze. She told me about her son, Joseph. Something shifted in his expression, softness, sympathy, a trace of sadness. Yeah, he said quietly. She mentioned him once, just in passing. I didn't know the full story. She said you remind her of him. He nodded. I figured. Sometimes when she looks at me, I see it in her eyes. Joseph, I whispered, my voice hardly more than a breath. Why didn't you tell me you were helping her with her son's things? He looked down at his hands. I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't know how to bring it up. Every time I went over there, she was already emotional. I didn't want to make her grief worse by talking about it casually. I took a slow breath. She said there's something else she wants to tell us. Something she didn't say. That got his attention. His brows tightened a little. What does she mean? I don't know, I said honestly, but she wants us both there. He leaned back thinking, did she seem upset? She seemed peaceful, but also nervous. He sighed softly. All right, we'll go. We agreed to visit Margaret the next afternoon, but that night, sleep came slowly. I lay awake listening to the soft rhythm of Joseph's breathing beside me, the sound usually comforting but now filled with questions I couldn't quite form. Why didn't Margaret tell him yet? Why did she need me there too? What could possibly involve both of us? The next day arrived with a quiet that felt almost unreal. The sky was pale, the trees still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Joseph and I walked side by side toward Margaret's house. His hand brushed mine once, not intentional, just a small accident, but even that small touch made me wonder how close I had felt to losing something without knowing what it was. When Margaret opened the door, her smile was softer than usual. She stepped aside and let us in, moving with the slow grace of someone carrying old memories. She gestured for us to sit on the couch while she took the armchair across from us. For a moment, she held her hands together in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you both for coming, she said softly. I know this might be difficult. Joseph glanced at me, then leaned forward. Margaret, whatever it is, just tell us. She took a slow breath. I need to say something I should have said earlier. Something I kept to myself because I was afraid of how it might be taken. My heart thudded once, slow and heavy. Rebecca, she said, looking at me gently, I want you to know I never meant to come between you and your husband. The room felt still. You didn't, I whispered. But you worried me. I understand, she said. And I'm sorry, truly. But the reason he visits isn't what you think. Joseph straightened slightly. Then what is it? Margaret looked between us, her eyes glistening with something emotional and old. It's about my son, she said. But it's not only that he died. My breath froze. There's something else, she whispered. Something connecting your lives to mine. Joseph frowned. I don't understand. She reached into a small wooden box beside her and pulled out an old envelope worn at the edges, yellowed with time. She held it carefully, like it was fragile. This, she said softly, is something Joseph kept, something I found among his things when I moved here. She handed the envelope to Joseph. My hands felt numb as he opened it slowly. Inside was a small photograph, a photograph of a young man, a man who looked almost exactly like Joseph. My husband stared at it, his lips parting slightly in confusion. What is this? He whispered. Margaret's voice trembled. That's Joseph. The resemblance was undeniable. Same jawline, same eyes, same quiet strength in his expression. Joseph looked stunned. I felt the world tilt slightly around me. He could be your brother, I whispered without thinking. Margaret swallowed hard. That's what I needed to tell you, she said softly. Joseph was adopted. He found out when he was 27. She paused, her eyes full of emotion. His birth mother's last name was Carter. The room fell silent. Joseph froze. I stared. Margaret lowered her gaze. I believe, she whispered, that Joseph was your brother. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The room felt silent in a way I had never felt silence before. Thick, full, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The photograph trembled slightly in Joseph's hands. He stared at it as though he had been dropped into a memory he never knew he had. His voice finally broke through the quiet, low and unsteady. My brother? Margaret nodded gently. I believe so. I can't say it with complete certainty, but the resemblance, the timing, the records Joseph kept, everything points to it. I looked at the photo again. The young man Joseph had Joseph's eyes, Joseph's posture. Even the slight tilt of his head felt familiar. My heart squeezed painfully. Why didn't you tell him sooner? I asked softly. Margaret looked down at her hands. Because I wasn't sure how. I didn't want to hurt either of you. When Joseph passed, all I had left were pieces of his life notes, letters, records he kept. I found that photograph and the adoption papers only last year. She took a steady breath. When I moved next door, I had no idea who you were. Not until I saw your husband. And you recognized him? I whispered. Yes, she said. It felt like seeing a ghost. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that made my heart stop for a moment. I could see tears in her eyes, but she kept her voice calm. Every time Joseph came over, she continued, I felt I was getting a tiny part of my son back. Not because I wanted to replace him. No, but because something in me needed to know him again, even if just through a resemblance. Joseph swallowed hard, still staring at the photograph. I didn't know I had a brother. My parents never. He stopped. His face tightened. They never said anything. My chest tightened at the pain in his voice. Sometimes, Margaret whispered, families keep secrets because they think they're protecting someone, even if the truth hurts more. Joseph stood slowly, pacing toward the window, one hand on the back of his neck. I knew that gesture. It was the one he used when he felt something too big to hold. My parents are both gone, he said quietly. If this is true, I'll never get answers. I stood and gently touched his arm. We don't need every answer right away, I said softly. We just need to understand what we can. He turned the photograph over, studying the worn edges as though they held something more. Margaret's voice softened. I didn't call you here to push anything on you. I only wanted to be honest. And to thank you. Thank me? Joseph asked, surprised. For giving me kindness, she said. For helping me go through Joseph's belongings without knowing why it mattered to me so much. You didn't judge me. You didn't rush me. You just showed up every day. And that meant more than I can express. Her voice cracked, and she looked toward her hands again, blinking away tears. I'm sorry if my connection to him made you uncomfortable, Rebecca, she added, turning to me. I understand how it might have seemed. I shook my head slowly. I just didn't know. I didn't understand. My voice wavered. But now, I do. Something inside me eased, something tight, something fearful, something that had been whispering dark thoughts during the quiet nights. And yet, another feeling took its place, a deeper sadness, a quiet ache for a man I had never met, a man who looked so much like my husband. Margaret gently lifted the wooden box beside her and held it out toward Joseph. This is for you, she said. These are Joseph's things, the pieces of him he kept close. Letters, journals, photos, his handwriting, his thoughts. Joseph hesitated. His hands trembled slightly. I don't know if I can, he whispered. You don't have to read everything now, she said softly, or ever. Just keep it, because it belongs to you as much as it belonged to him. Joseph took the box slowly, his breath unsteady. He sat again, carefully placing the box on his lap as if it were breakable. Margaret leaned back, her shoulders relaxing like she had finally put down a weight she had carried alone for years. I'm not asking for anything from you, she said. Not a relationship, not expectations. I just wanted you to know that you weren't helping a stranger. Her voice softened to a whisper. You were helping family. Those words wrapped around us like a warm but painful truth, one we didn't know how to hold yet. After a long moment, Joseph spoke again, his voice quiet but steadier. Can I ask something? Of course, Margaret said. Why did Joseph search for his birth family? Joseph asked. Did he want to meet them? Margaret closed her eyes briefly, nodding. Yes, he wanted to know where he came from. He wanted to understand the missing pieces. But he never reached the point of finding names. He only got as far as the surname, Carter. Her eyes met his gently. He would have wanted to meet you. The room fell still again. Even though I didn't know Joseph, tears filled my eyes at the thought of a young man searching for a brother he never met, carrying that longing through his life, only to leave the world before finding the answers. Joseph put his hand over his face, exhaling slowly. I moved closer and held his arm again, and this time he leaned into me quiet, hurting, overwhelmed. Margaret watched us with soft eyes, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to make the moment heavier than it already was. After a while, Joseph whispered, I want to know more about him. Margaret nodded, her voice warm. Whenever you're ready, I'll tell you everything. A quiet understanding settled over the room. The truth wasn't betrayal. The truth wasn't a secret affair or hidden intentions. The truth was much heavier and much more human. It was grief. It was connection. It was family we never knew existed. And now, everything in our lives had changed. The hours after we left Margaret's house moved slowly, like walking through soft rain. Nothing around us looked different, the same trees, the same houses, the same quiet street. But inside, everything felt changed. The truth she shared had settled deep in our lives, spreading through memories we didn't even know were connected. When we stepped into our house, Joseph set the wooden box gently on the dining table, almost afraid to let it out of his hands. He stood there for a long moment, staring at it. I didn't rush him. I didn't say anything at all. I just stood beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. "Do you want to open it?" I whispered. He shook his head slightly. "Not yet." So we sat down at the table, but neither of us touched the box. The house felt quiet, like it was holding its breath again. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, soft and gold, landing on the box that carried pieces of a life we had never known. After a while, Joseph spoke, his voice low. "Do you think my parents knew?" I took a slow breath. If Joseph was adopted, maybe his birth mother never told anyone else. Or maybe your parents kept it from you for reasons they thought were right. He nodded, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the ache of knowing there were questions he could never ask now. He whispered, "I just wish they had told me. I wish I had known." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Not knowing doesn't change who you are, and it doesn't erase the life you've built." He squeezed my hand gently, but he didn't speak. A few minutes later, he rose and walked to the living room. I followed quietly. He sat on the couch, resting his elbows on his knees, looking at the floor. "I keep wondering what he was like," he said softly. "If we would have gotten along. If we looked alike when we were kids. If we would have shared anything." "You shared something," I said quietly. "Even if you didn't know it." He nodded, his eyes glistening but calm. A moment passed before I added, "You should talk to Margaret when you're ready. She'll tell you everything." He breathed in slowly, steadying himself. "I will." That evening, I made dinner, though neither of us ate much. Joseph kept glancing toward the dining table where the wooden box sat, untouched but heavy with meaning. When we went to bed, he lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. I could feel the thoughts running through him, slow, heavy, echoing. "Are you okay?" I whispered. He turned his head toward me. "I don't know." I moved closer and rested my hand on his chest. His heart was beating slowly, steadily, but with a weight inside it I couldn't lift for him. "We'll get through this," I said softly. He closed his eyes. "I'm just trying to understand why I never knew. Why nobody ever told me anything." "Sometimes," I said, "people believe they're protecting a child by hiding the truth, even if it hurts years later." He exhaled, long and quiet. "I just wish I had known him." I felt my throat tighten. "You know him now. Maybe not the way you wanted, but in some way you do." We fell asleep holding hands, something we hadn't done in years. Not because we grew apart, but because life becomes routine. But that night, routine didn't exist. Only truth, only closeness, only the quiet ache between us. The next morning, Joseph woke early. The sun had just begun to touch the sky when I found him sitting at the dining table again, the wooden box open in front of him. He looked up at me, his eyes tender but tired. "I opened it," he said quietly. I sat across from him, my heart beating slow. Inside the box were pieces of a life, Joseph's life, letters written in soft handwriting, a journal, old photographs, a small silver key, a folded map, a ticket stub from a baseball game. Simple things, but deeply personal. Joseph picked up a small notebook with worn corners. "This was his journal," he whispered. I nodded softly. "Do you want to read it?" "Not now," he murmured. "Maybe later." He set it down carefully, as if it were fragile. Then he pulled out a photograph of Joseph as a teenager. He held it for a while, studying the boy's eyes, soft, curious, so much like his own. "He looks like me," Joseph whispered. "You look like brothers," I said gently. He closed his eyes for a moment, holding the photograph against his chest. When he opened them again, they were filled with a quiet determination. "I want to talk to Margaret today," he said. "I want to know everything she can tell me." "I'll go with you," I said softly. He shook his head. "No, I think I need to do this part alone. Just the two of us." She knew him. I didn't. "She has memories I want to hear without anyone else in the room." My heart sank a little, but I understood. "I'll wait for you," I said gently. He stood, taking a slow breath, steadying himself for the next step. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at me. "Thank you," he whispered. For standing beside me, I nodded, my voice too soft to use. When he stepped outside, I watched him through the window, each step filled with a quiet courage I had never seen in him before. He was going to learn who he was, who he came from, who he lost before he ever knew he had them. And I knew, deep in my heart, that everything after today would change us again. After Joseph left to speak with Margaret, the house felt strangely empty. Not lonely, just quiet in a way that made every small sound echo a little louder. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the window, watching as he crossed the lawn with slow, steady steps. When he knocked on her door, Margaret opened it almost immediately, as though she had been waiting. She offered him a soft smile and stepped aside to let him in. Then the door closed, and suddenly, I didn't know what to do with myself. I walked around the house aimlessly, straightening cushions, wiping the counter, opening and closing drawers without needing anything from them. My hands kept moving, but my mind felt full of stillness. Every few minutes, I found myself looking back at the window, checking if he had returned. He didn't. After an hour passed, I sat down at the dining table where the wooden box still lay open. Carefully, I looked through it again, not reading anything, just seeing the small pieces of a life that had been lived somewhere close to ours. There was a small photo of a house I didn't recognize, a birthday card signed Mom and Dad, in handwriting that wasn't Margaret's, a hospital bracelet, a folded note with words I didn't open. I touched them gently, feeling a quiet ache in my chest. This wasn't just a story for Joseph. It was a connection deep and unexpected, pulling him towards someone who should have been part of his life long ago. When the clock ticked past another hour, I finally made myself sit down on the couch. I clasped my hands together, trying to calm the restlessness moving inside me. I wasn't jealous anymore. I wasn't suspicious, but I was afraid. Afraid of how this new truth might reshape my husband. Afraid of what memories he might wish he had. Afraid of what regrets he might carry forward. I took a long breath and whispered to myself, he just needs time. And I need to let him have that. Outside, leaves rustled softly, brushing against the sidewalk. The faint sound helped steady my breathing. Nearly 2.5 hours later, I finally heard the front door open. Joseph stepped inside, closing it gently behind him. He didn't speak right away. He walked toward me with slow, thoughtful steps, and when he sat beside me, his shoulders seemed both heavy and relieved. I waited. He leaned back, letting out a breath he had been holding for too long. I learned a lot, he said quietly. I nodded. Do you want to tell me? Yes, he whispered. I think I do. He took my hand, holding it as if it grounded him. She told me everything about him, about Joseph. His voice softened. She told me what he loved, what he hated, what made him laugh. His eyes glistened. He liked to fix things too, he said. She said he would repair anything he could get his hands on, even when it wasn't broken. I felt my heart soften. He had a quiet nature like me, Joseph continued. He loved baseball. He used to stay up late listening to games on the radio. And he wrote letters not because anyone asked him to, but because he liked expressing things on paper. He paused, his voice trembling slightly. She told me he spent years wondering who his birth family was, he whispered. Not angrily, just wondering, searching for a place that felt like home. Tears rose in my eyes before I could stop them. Joseph rubbed his thumb across the back of my hand. She showed me pictures, he said. Some of him as a child, some of him as a grown man. And when I looked at them, he swallowed. It felt like looking at the version of myself I'll never meet. I touched his arm gently. I'm so sorry, Joseph. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. I kept thinking, what would he have been like? Would we have argued? Would we have fished together? Would we have shared birthdays? He breathed out shakily. All the things brothers do. I didn't speak. I just let him breathe. After a long moment, he added, Margaret said he talked about finding us. He wanted to meet me. His voice softened, but he never got the chance. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I wiped it gently with my thumb. And now, he whispered, I'm his brother without even knowing him. I nodded, letting the truth settle between us. He turned to face me fully, his eyes warm and tired. But I'm glad I know now. I'm glad she told me. Are you angry with her? I asked quietly. No, he whispered. Not at all. She wasn't hiding it out of selfishness. She was hurting. And I think, in some way, helping her helped me too. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a soft understanding that sat like light inside me. "So what happens now?" I asked gently. Joseph looked thoughtful. "I don't know," he said, "but I want to be there for her. Not because she's our neighbor, not because she needs help," he paused, "but because she lost her son, and he was my brother." I nodded, my heart full. "And I want you with me," he added softly. I squeezed his hand. "I'm here." We sat together in the quiet of the late afternoon, the weight of the truth slowly settling into something gentler, something we could carry. Not fear, not suspicion, not secrets, just connection, loss, and a kind of unexpected family that entered our lives without warning. And now, everything began to move toward healing. In the days that followed, something gentle shifted inside our home. The heaviness was still there, yes, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It felt more like a quiet ache, something you learn to hold with both hands, carefully, respectfully. Joseph woke up earlier than usual every morning, not out of worry this time, but with a sense of purpose, a soft determination. He would sit at the dining table with a cup of coffee and open Joseph's box, going through one item at a time. Sometimes he read a letter. Sometimes he traced the edges of an old photograph. Sometimes he just sat there, holding a piece of Joseph's handwriting like it carried a heartbeat of its own. I didn't interrupt. I didn't hover. I stayed close enough to be present, but far enough to let him move through his feelings in his own quiet way. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the couch with Joseph's journal open on his lap. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. He looked almost peaceful. "He wrote about wanting a brother," Joseph said softly. "He wrote about wondering if someone out there shared his smile or his habits, or his stubbornness." He let out a faint breath. He was talking about me without knowing it. I sat beside him, resting a hand on his arm. "You're giving him something now," I whispered. "You're giving his story somewhere to go." Joseph closed the journal gently, as if it were something alive. "I want to keep learning about him. I don't want his life to fade." "It won't," I said. "Not as long as you carry it." Later that evening, Joseph told me he wanted to invite Margaret over for dinner. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of something deeper: connection, kindness, and the beginnings of a bond that had been broken long before any of us knew it existed. When I walked over to Margaret's house to extend the invitation, she opened the door with that familiar gentle smile. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, gratitude mixed with relief. "I would love to," she said softly. "Thank you, Rebecca." That night felt almost peaceful. We set the table with the good plates, lit a small candle, and let the evening settle around us like a warm blanket. When Margaret arrived, she carried a small framed photo of Joseph with her. "I thought it might be nice for him to be here too," she said quietly. Joseph placed the photo gently at the center of the table, and somehow it felt right. We talked not about loss, not about sadness, but about simple things. About Joseph's favorite foods. About the little things he used to do that made Margaret laugh. About memories that made Joseph smile, even though he hadn't lived them himself. By the end of the night, something had changed between the three of us. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We weren't just people tied together by coincidence. We were something closer. Something like family finally meeting after a long journey. And for the first time since everything began, I felt hope return to our home. Over the next few weeks, life found a new rhythm: soft, steady, and surprisingly comforting. Joseph visited Margaret often, but now everything felt open, honest, and warm. There were no secrets, no hidden moments, no quiet doubts lingering in the corners of my mind. Instead, there was understanding. There was purpose. Sometimes I joined them. Sometimes I watched from the kitchen window as they spoke on her porch, two people connected not by chance, but by the gentle threads of a shared story, threads that had been hidden for years. One Saturday morning, Margaret invited us over to look through more of Joseph's belongings. Joseph carried the wooden box, and I walked beside him, feeling his quiet strength. When Margaret opened the door, she gave us that same warm smile, but this time I saw something lighter and at peace. Inside, she had arranged Joseph's things neatly on the table: journals, photos, drawings he made when he was younger, even a small wooden birdhouse he built as a boy. Joseph touched each item as though he were discovering pieces of himself scattered across a life he never knew existed. "He loved making things," Margaret said softly, lifting the little birdhouse. "He said building things made him feel calm, made him feel useful." Joseph smiled faintly. "I know the feeling," She placed the birdhouse into his hands. "It belongs with you now." The simple gesture made my throat tighten. As Joseph looked through the rest of the items, Margaret sat beside me and whispered, "Thank you for being patient, for not assuming the worst, for letting him find this in his own time." I nodded slowly. "I didn't understand at first, but now I'm grateful he had you." She took my hand gently. "He has you too, and that's what matters." We stayed for nearly 2 hours, listening to Margaret share stories that made Joseph laugh softly, stories that made him pause and swallow hard, stories that filled the empty spaces between past and present. Before we left, Margaret placed a thin envelope in Joseph's hands. "This was the letter Joseph wrote to himself when he first decided to look for his birth family," she said. "You don't have to read it today, but one day, when your heart is ready, you should." Joseph held it carefully, nodding. "Thank you." That evening, after dinner, we sat together in the living room, the envelope resting on Joseph's knees. He didn't open it, but he ran his fingers across the edges quietly, as though feeling the weight of every word inside it. "I'll read it someday," he said softly. "Not now, not tonight, but someday." I leaned against him. "Whenever you're ready." The days that followed brought a gentle closeness between all three of us. I often saw Margaret in her garden, and she would wave, her smile warm and steady. Sometimes she would stop by with fresh baked cookies, or invite us for tea. It felt natural. It felt right. One evening, Joseph and I walked the short path between our houses, the sky painted with soft pink clouds. He took my hand in his, the way he used to when we were younger. "I feel lighter," he said quietly. "Sad, but lighter." "I know," I murmured. "I just wish I could have met him," Joseph added. "I wish he knew I existed. I wish he knew he wasn't alone." "He knows now," I said gently. "Somewhere, in some way, he knows." Joseph looked at me with soft eyes. "Thank you for staying by my side through all of this." "I'll always stay," I said. He nodded, breathing in the cool evening air. "I want to make sure Margaret never feels alone again. She's lost enough." "We will," I said. "Together." And as we walked back home, the light fading behind us, I felt something settle quietly in my heart. A truth that felt warm and steady. We had not lost something. We had found something unexpected, painful, beautiful. And it was shaping us into people who loved a little deeper, understood a little better, and held each other a little closer. A few weeks later, I noticed something new in Joseph. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, quiet, like everything else about him. But it was there. He carried himself differently, a little straighter, a little more grounded, as if knowing the truth had given him permission to breathe again. One Sunday morning, I found him sitting at the dining table with Joseph's journal open. The soft light touched his face, and he looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. He closed the journal gently when he saw me. "I think I'm ready," he said. "For what?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. "To read the letter." My heart fluttered not from fear, but from tenderness. I nodded. "Whenever you're ready, I'm right here." He opened the envelope with slow, steady hands. The paper inside was folded neatly, worn at the edges. When he began reading, his eyes moved slowly across each line, as though he didn't want to miss a single word. After a moment, he exhaled a soft, trembling breath. "He wrote about wanting to know where he came from," Joseph said. "He wrote about hoping he had a brother, someone who might look like him, someone who might understand him." He swallowed hard. "He hoped I was kind," he whispered. "He hoped I was safe. He hoped I existed." Tears slowly welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, one by one, soaking into the paper in his hands. I placed my hand over his, and he closed his fingers around mine, holding on tightly. "He didn't write with anger," Joseph continued. "He wrote with hope. He wanted connection, not answers. He wanted family." A small broken sound escaped his chest, half laugh, half sob. "He wanted me." "I'm so sorry," I whispered, brushing his shoulder gently. Joseph nodded, breathing slow and deep. "I can't change what happened, but I can honor him now. I can remember him." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "And you're not doing it alone." Later that afternoon, we walked over to Margaret's house with a small bouquet of white lilies, simple, gentle, honest. When she opened the door, Joseph held out the flowers, his hands slightly trembling. "These are for Joseph," he said softly. "And for you." Margaret's eyes softened instantly. She touched the bouquet with trembling fingers, then pressed her hand over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means to me." We sat together in her living room, the three of us surrounded by quiet sunlight and memories. This time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was warm, comforting, like a blanket woven from shared loss and shared healing. Joseph told her he had read the letter. Margaret cried softly, nodding as he spoke, as though hearing her son's words again through someone else's voice gave her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. "He wanted to find you," she said gently, "and now, in a way, he has." Joseph reached for her hand, and she took it, their fingers intertwining across the small space between them. "You're not alone," he told her. "Not anymore." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Neither are you." Later, as we walked home, Joseph slipped his arm around my shoulders. The air was cool but soft, carrying the scent of pine from the trees at the corner of the street. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I feel like I've gained something I never knew I needed." "I know," I said. "It hurts," he whispered, "but it also fills something inside me." "That's how healing works," I said softly. "A little pain, a little peace, both at the same time." He nodded, holding me closer. And as we walked toward our home, our familiar porch, our warm lights, our quiet life, I felt something settle gently inside me. A truth I didn't realize I needed. Sometimes family finds you in ways you never expect. Sometimes love grows out of loss. Sometimes healing begins the moment you allow your heart to open again. Joseph had found a brother he never knew. Margaret had found a son through the kindness of a stranger. And I had found peace in a truth that once frightened me. Our lives were different now, softer, more connected, more aware of the small, quiet miracles that shape us. Life didn't go back to the way it was before, not exactly, but in some quiet, gentle way, it became something better. A few months passed, and the three of us settled into a new rhythm. Not forced, not uncomfortable, just natural, as though this connection had been waiting beneath the surface all along, waiting for the right moment to rise. Margaret became more than a neighbor. She became part of our days, our conversations, our small rituals. Some evenings she'd join us for dinner. Other times we'd walk to her porch just to sit with her under the fading light, listening to crickets as the sky turned soft and blue. Joseph especially found comfort in those moments. Sometimes I watched him from a distance, how he leaned forward when she spoke, how he listened with quiet understanding, how he carried his brother's memory with gentle strength instead of heavy sorrow. He smiled more, not wide or loud, but real, warm, deep. One evening, after Margaret left our house, Joseph lingered at the front door. He watched her walk across the yard, her figure small under the porch light, her steps steady. "She's stronger than I realized," he said. "So are you," I whispered. He turned to me, his expression soft. "I wouldn't have made it through this without you." I touched his face gently. "You didn't make it alone, and you never will." He kissed my forehead, something he hadn't done in a long time, and I felt a warmth spread through me, slow and tender. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I sat by the window looking out at the two houses side by side, ours and Margaret's. The lights in her living room glowed softly, a small steady reminder that healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in little moments, shared laughter, shared stories, shared silence. It happened in the spaces between loss and understanding, between truth and acceptance, between strangers and something like family. I thought about the beginning of all this, the mornings when I watched Joseph walk across the lawn, the way Margaret smiled, the way doubt grew quietly inside me. I remembered the fear I felt, the questions, the nights I lay awake wondering what I didn't know. Sometimes the mind creates shadows where there are none, and sometimes the truth waiting for us is kinder than the fear we imagine. I wiped a small tear from my cheek, not from sadness, but from gratitude. This journey had changed us. It had softened the edges of our lives. It had opened doors we didn't even know were closed. In the months that followed, Joseph and Margaret grew close in a way that felt natural and right, not as mother and son, not exactly, but as two people connected through love for the same person, through loss, through hope, through the quiet discovery of what family can mean. And I found my own place in it, not as an outsider, not as someone watching from the edges, but as someone helping hold the pieces together. One Sunday afternoon, while sitting on the porch, Margaret said something I will never forget. "You know," she whispered, "grief doesn't disappear. It just finds somewhere softer to rest." I felt my throat tighten. "I think it found home with us," She smiled gently. Yes, I think it did. That night, as Joseph and I prepared for bed, he paused by the dresser where Joseph's photograph stood in a simple frame. He straightened it carefully and touched the corner of the glass. I don't feel like I lost a brother anymore, he said quietly. I feel like I found one. I nodded. You did. In the only way that was still possible. He took my hand. Thank you for trusting me when it was hard, for not letting doubt win. I smiled softly. You gave me the truth, and the truth gave us all a new beginning. We turned off the light and lay in the quiet warmth of our home, a home that had once felt uncertain, but now felt full of connection and calm. And as I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a single thought settled deeply inside me. Sometimes life gives you answers you never expected. Sometimes love arrives through a door you thought was closing. Sometimes the truth heals more than it hurts. And sometimes, family finds you in the most unexpected way.